Welcome back to the second video in my Art Fix series. So today we've got two more artists. We're going to go through a bit more of their work, see what things we can fix in terms of anatomy and lighting. So yep, without further ado, let's get right into it. So our first artist for this video is Anti_I3. With this first piece of theirs, there's a few things to look at right off the bat. So we can see that this character has a pretty strong, defiant pose. They're looking off to this left angle, but the slants on their body don't quite match up with the way this pose the expression and emotion this pose is trying to convey. The line of action, especially from the kind of countering diagonal slopes of the shoulders versus the hips, doesn't really make too much sense. So the first thing we're going to do is bring up this shoulder here on the right. I'll just use this darker tone in this shade. And then we'll also match that by also bringing up the seam at the front of this dress, just to make sure that our three-dimensional shapes make sense. So now you can see that anatomically speaking, this pose makes a lot more sense with a straight forward-facing character looking towards their enemy or their opposition or whatever. The second issue with this piece is kind of how the lighting is hitting this character's body. The first point is that, as you can see, it's hitting this character's face straight on, which means that we wouldn't really be seeing this right arm be cast in so much shadow, especially when this left arm here has such a strong light coming across it. And we also wouldn't be seeing the back of the hair lit up so much if the body's covering it. We want kind of those harsh shadow lines to match with the direction that the light's facing. So we'll bring across a lot of this lighter tones from the left side of the shoulder and also the left arm. Bring that over to the right and just tidy that up a little bit. And now we'll just go ahead and fix up these shading in the hair as well. I quite like the detail that's been done here, but I just think it'd be better to create strong and clear shapes of light and shadow that are kind of a little bit more lost when there's so much detail with the hair. Some hair strands that have light, some hair strands that don't. So just being a bit more clear about, what's the actual form that's being created by the shadows cast on the actual hair. And the second thing is that we'll bring through a bit more of this blue tone and create kind of a gradient as the hair, as you look from left to right across the hair. Because obviously there's blue light hitting the character, it would presumably be hitting a bit more of that, of this big form of hair that's behind the character. And one final little comment about the hair, just related to this idea of you want these busy and these resting areas in your piece. This fringe that comes over the side of the character's face, all this kind of extra line work that's in it, it's really good detail, but I think it kind of makes the eye look towards this busy area when really the face is what you want to focus on. So I think by just changing some of these lines, softening into more of like a blue color, painting over them, it'll just make the piece feel a little bit more cohesive, considering that you had kind of flatter areas of color in the skin and on the front of this kind of tunic dress thing that the character has. And I'm also going to use an airbrush just to even out some of the lighting across the front of the character as well. There's a really nice blue gradient coming from like the left to the right of the whole piece, but we want to show that the light's hitting the entirety of the body. And I'll just adjust that to an add layer as well, so you get that full effect of that kind of glow that's coming from this left side of the piece. Next stage as well, we'll tidy up some of the shadows around this bottom part of the piece here. Just where this tunic's kind of overlaying these boots the character's got on, we'd find more of a harsher shadow coming across there because of that strong light that's coming from the left side of the piece. So we'll do multiply for that, and we'll lower the opacity as well, just so it's not too intense. And I'm also going to bring a bit of this shadow through to the the little strands of this belt as well, and on the underside of the staff she's holding. We're also going to fix up the curvature of this belt. It's kind of having, you know, this downwards curve, as you can see across the front of the character. But really, if they're standing up so straight and they've got such a upwards leaning posture, this belt's going to have more of a you know, flat line, like a flat kind of structure as it goes across the, wraps around the front of the character. And just as I've made that strong shadow on the right side of the belt, I'm also going to bring that strong shadow over to the left arm as well. And I'll also bring this shadow through to the face of the character. We're going to really define that nose and chin shape as we go through. And the last adjustment, I am just going to go back through this hair and darken it a bit more than I originally did. I think giving it a darker value will make it less of a focal point and direct the viewer's eye to the front of the character, which is what we want. And I just think it makes a bit more sense with the lighting as well, considering how much the hair is behind the character and therefore not getting hit by the light from this angle. So here's our finished piece. I feel like the changes we made to just small things like the shadows and kind of the form we've shaped with a bit of the rendering has just made this a bit more of an appealing piece. Thanks very much for submitting. And now on to the second submission from this artist. With respect to this piece, they want us to look at the anatomy of some of the hands they've used. With respect to this larger hand on the side of the character's face, I think it's perfectly well done. I can actually see no anatomical problems with the way it looks. But this smaller hand, which is holding the cherries, has a few issues which we're going to go into. If I just start by following the line work made by these fingers, it actually all looks pretty good. These fingers are in the right proportion, right length, and they look good in the style that this artist is using. But the problem comes to the actual length of the palm here, where it would look a bit more correct if I extended it downwards diagonally or even more vertically downwards, but in this really condensed short form, it just doesn't look right. So based on this new structure I've kind of just drawn in, we're going to bring down this side of the hand just here. We're also going to bring down this kind of other side where the thumb connects. And we'll also keep in mind to use our shadows to actually really shape the form of the hand as a whole. So even as I'm adjusting these outlines, I'm noticing the hand's actually too far over to the left to line up properly with the rest of the forearm. This is actually another point that kind of can throw off how our hands look. That we need to look in the context of the whole arm. So just as I'm bringing this one a little bit more over to the right, even that thickness and width of this forearm actually looks a bit more consistent with how the hand should properly be looking. So all I'm doing now is just tidying up some of these little areas, and I'm changing the thickness of the arm and bringing in some extra shadows here. And yeah, now I'm just shaping the side of the hand, so I'm going to use this curvature of the shadow to give a bit more form. And I'm just going to add in a bit more of the outlines and neaten up some of these fingers that are kind of lost in the pixelation when I enlarged it. So yeah, not really too many changes here. It's mostly just a matter of making sure you keep your proportions in check in terms of how kind of tall or short these hands look, especially when they're in kind of different and awkward positions. But yeah, thanks very much for the submission. So now we move on to the works from our next artist, Orange's Art. And this first piece they've submitted, they're a bit confused about what to do with the lighting. And I agree, it's quite inconsistent. There's this kind of area of the character where the top half's lit. You've got a dramatic shadow coming in front of them, but then there's no real source of light that's kind of consistent across the whole artwork. So we're going to neaten this up, and we're going to try and isolate the different kind of areas we want. I think we'll stick with the lighting from behind and make a really dramatic scene for the character, just to maintain this like front shadow. And we'll have to realign kind of some of the perspective as well, especially with these surrounding objects, the way the light is, and how tilted forward the character is. So first, we're going to knock out this perspective. We're going to see how these lines from the different objects in the character scene, where they actually converge. And obviously you can see as we're drawing them through, they're all going to kind of different vanishing points across a single line of the character. And we don't really want that. We want a consistent vanishing point for everything. So we're going to redo this where we've got the floor coming up a bit higher. So we're going to have the focal point and the vanishing point be behind the character's head, make it a bit more dramatic. It means we're going to have to tilt forward these barrels a bit more. So we'll be seeing more of kind of a circular shape from then. We're going to be seeing more of the top of the barrel. And these balls will actually be getting kind of smaller as they get towards the front of the page, not quite as big, because we're looking at them from a higher angle than we've actually established in the piece already. But with that planning out of the way, we're going to jump straight into some of the lighting. So now we know that we want a strong backlight. I'm just going to lasso around the character. I'm going to bring in a dark multiply layer, like a dark blue, just create a more intense shadow on the front of the character. And I've already left a bit of a rim just to emulate that rim light that you'd be getting in kind of hair and around skin and some of the clothes when you'd be having such a strong light from behind. I'm also going to duplicate and distort this layer to more accurately reflect that shadow that's going to come from behind, just because before it wasn't actually quite lining up with the character's feet properly. Now, another thing to consider is the ambient light. So there's this strong light coming from behind. There's the light that hits the floor is going to bounce off and hit other areas of the object. So you can see it's been done quite well already with the balls. You can see that the shading's been done so that light source is really there. But that light's also going to reflect really strongly on the underside of the face, kind of around the nose, and other areas on the character. So we'll need to go back in and add a bit of that. And I'm going to darken the cheeks and nose of the face where the light doesn't hit with a bit more of a saturated colour, just to bring a little bit more life into the character. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to raise the floor from our perspective. I'm going to So now we're going to go through and we're going to actually fix the surrounding scenery. So we're going to bring up the floor, we're going to redraw in these barrels in different ways so they actually have a great perspective. And yeah, we'll streak down some of the balls as well. And yeah, make sure the lines coming from the light source actually make sense with the perspective of where they're coming from, which is the edge of the room and the end of the floor. And the final thing I'm going to add in terms of lighting is I'm going to add a little bit of a kind of an ambient glow behind the character, just where the light kind of diffuses into the air and kind of, you know, we can see slight little rays coming from around the character, just to really push the character away from the background. And now that we just finished up with the last little bits of perspective with the sizing of the balls, we're going to add some strong cast shadows on these objects as well. Because if it's casting such a strong shadow when it hits the character, you'd assume that it would interact with a lot of these objects in the same way. And so now we have our before and our after. I think this change to lighting has really helped elevate the kind of dramatic nature of the piece, really helped highlight the character. And yeah, I hope these tips kind of helped you find new ways to experiment and really push your lighting to get the effect you want. Thanks very much for the submission, and we'll move on to your next piece. So on to the next submission from this artist, where we've got a character reference sheet, and there's a few things I'd like to fix, especially anatomically and in terms of having consistency across turnarounds of your character. So number one, let's look at this head right here. The shape of the head and the shape of the jawline all looks perfectly fine to me if we trace these all in here. But if I'm going to go ahead and draw in a neck on this character, I'm going to look at a central line coming down from this spherical shape we've got for the head. I'm going to try and draw the neck around it. But if we look at what has been done in this piece, we can see that the actual middle point of the neck and where the neck connects to the head is really far back. And I'm going to turn off the layer here just to show you how it looks. Yeah, it looks kind of more like an animal or a dinosaur. I mean, it doesn't actually quite look like correct anatomically. So that's the first thing we're going to fix about this. We're going to bring the neck a lot more forward, and I'm just going to select this piece and draw it, bring it forward here before we start painting over it. Because our accuracy in things like the points in which joints and limbs and parts of our bodies connect is really what's going to sell us on this character being, you know, a real person, something that's grounded in reality. So I'm just going to start painting over this now. We're going to bring through this shadow from the bottom of the jaw and, you know, make that a bit more accurate. We're also going to cross-reference actually by looking at the front of the character. But we can see in both other front views, they have a very strong jawline. So when it comes to painting this side profile, we're going to make sure it's consistent by making a very square shape. We're going to bring this chin a bit more forward, a bit more down, and make that jawline a lot stronger, just like it is from the front view, to show that we're being consistent in the different ways that we draw our characters from different angles. And we'll just touch up the hair on the back of the character as well, because we can see from this front profile that it drops down a little bit below the side of that jawline. And now that the jawline's fixed up, I think we'll also look at making the hair a bit more consistent across both models. We can see how straight and flat it is in this front view, but from the side it's very spiky, but yeah, we don't really see those same spikes coming from the front. So as appealing as it might be to have a more interesting look from a different angle, you've got to make sure there's at least some consistency in the way the character looks. Especially if you're considering a character for animation or a character that's going to be modeled in 3D. It's got to be plausible in reality that they can look this, they can maintain a look across different angles. So I'll start by adding a bit more hair at the front, a bit more volume, so we can match that same tall look of the hair from the front model. And we'll also bring a straight edge across the top of the hair, but we will leave this main spike in here because I think there's a way to make that work with the spike we can see on the left side of the front model. And now, so I'll go over to the front model and I'll just make this spike a little bit bigger, just in line with what we can see from what we've drawn on the side profile. So yeah, I think we're finished with this submission. I did end up going back and rounding out the top of the hair just to give it a bit more of a natural look, but I think the strong, sharp shape language from before would have also sold really well considering this character's theme. And yeah, I'm really happy with how much more consistent this character looks, because now that strong shape language you've sold us on in the front view also carries on to the side view, and you know that your character is going to look good now from basically any angle or pose or setting that you draw them in. But yeah, another big thanks to both artists this time for submitting so many pieces to be looked at in this video. And yeah, soon I'll have another submission period and we'll get in some more pieces for me to do some more little art fixes on. So yeah, stay tuned for the next in the series.